Just think about Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, companies that you wouldn't even imagine that they come into crypto. Now they were talking about their own stablecoin.
That's Bam Azizi, co-founder and CEO of Mesh. He built and sold a cybersecurity company with 2,000 integrations before pivoting Mesh into blockchain payment infrastructure. This signals a seismic shift enterprises can no longer afford to delay adopting.
Where they win is at the distribution level. They have millions of users, or if not billions of users using those rails. You have hundreds of millions of users that they own, or billions of users they own, like Visa card and Mastercard. You have big banks, international banks, they have hundreds of millions of users, or like companies like PayPal, Stripe, they have millions of merchants using them.
In this episode, you'll learn why legacy payment rails still dominate billions of users, but may be running out of time. How blockchain offers faster, lower-cost infrastructure that traditional systems struggle to match, and why the shift of tokenized real-world assets on-chain is creating urgency for institutions to act now. I'm Alex Nowaka, and this is High Stakes. Welcome back to another episode of High Stakes. I'm your host, Alex Nowaka, and today I am joined by Bam Azizi, who is the CEO of Mesh Connect. Welcome, Bam.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. Excited for this episode.
Absolutely. Well, Bam, maybe let's just start with a little bit on your background, a little background on Mesh. I'm sure a lot of folks who follow the fintech ecosystem closely will know who you are, but we have a bunch of folks in our audience that come from Wall Street and institutional finance who may not know you or may not know Mesh.
Yeah, so happy to give you a quick background. As far as my background goes, I'm a technical founder, coder and developer at heart. I don't know if it matters anymore with this AI that's happening. Anyone can code, but I started my previous company in cybersecurity, scaled and sold that business, and I started Mesh around 6 years ago. Our goal is at Mesh to build a new modern network for the world of crypto. We heavily believe that the future of economy will come on chain, from equity, from lending to real estate and deposits, and everything will happen on chain instead of on chain. And the problem is it's a very, very fragmented world. It's getting more fragmented as we're bringing more assets on chain. And Mesh's goal was very simple to grasp. We want to kind of abstract all of the complexity so businesses and users can move money from point A to point B. Could be many different use cases like payments, paying, payout, cross-border payments, B2B payment, P2P payment, Me2Me payment, any sort of payments that you can think of. These are basically type of use cases we're trying to cover. To simplify all of that, people are calling us like Visa for crypto, which I happen to agree. And I think that's kind of what we are building towards.
And Bam, maybe going back to when you started Mesh, what did you think the problem was when you started Mesh, and how did that thesis evolve now that you've been, sort of in the market and sort of have developed the company to the scale that you have?
So I wish we were that smart that start Mesh day one. Is what the way it is. As you know, as a founder, you go through many different pivots, and you have to change directions, change course, and change speed and things in that nature. Initially, Mesh was called Front. It was an app that would sit in front, and then you would connect all of your brokerages like Robinhood, your Coinbase, all of them, to Front app, and then manage everything on the Front app. And we used, like back then, pre-AI, you wanted to use AI to help people to manage all of their portfolio. And we were using other companies like open banking platforms like Plaid and Yodlee to be able to connect to those accounts. But the problem is they were not built for investment. They were built for banking. Like you want to connect your checking, your saving account, which doesn't move that much, versus investment that like higher resolution, right, moves and changes every single second. So, and then my team said like it really doesn't work. And then we're coming from the security background. At my previous company, No Password, we had 2,000 integrations. So we felt like we can leverage that knowledge and know how to be able to build similar technology here. So we started building that you could connect to Robinhood and Coinbase using Mesh engine. And then the moment we did that, the usage kind of skyrocketed. We went from almost 0 users to 500,000 user, more than $1 billion in connected assets on the platform. But it was 2022, and it was extremely hard to monetize this front application. And we couldn't raise more money. I was just self-funding it for a while. And then I asked my team that we really need to be more focused on monetization and revenue stream. And we felt like this little thing that we built for our own use case could be potentially very, very useful tool for many other applications that they already have figured out the monetization or the B2C. So we launched it on Product Hunt, ranked top 3 that day, landed our first 5 customers day 1. And we felt like, okay, that's it. Let's just pivot to B2B and then start building this mesh. And initially the name was Mesh Connect, and we changed it to Mesh Pay because we want to kind of show that we're very, very focused on the payment use case. That's how we evolved to what we are now. I wish that we were smart enough that from day 1 we would build this, but we went through a bunch of evolution.
Probably a tough question to answer just because of, sort of the context of that last question. But is there anything you look back at now that was a pretty major assumption that you made early on that turned out to be completely wrong?
Yeah, so just one.
I was going to say, it's tough to pick one.
I think the assumption initially that B2C is easy. I was coming from B2B API background. I felt like I need to do something around B2C, and I want to do something around fintech. So I created this company, but it happened to be very, very challenging, very, very hard to get the into basically adoption by the end users, especially like free adoptions. Many people download your app, but monetizing on top of it, that's extremely hard and challenging. So that was kind of the most important one that made a mistake.
And stablecoins, as you sort of mentioned as part of the lead-in, they're really having a moment, I would say, in the market, generally speaking. Do you view stablecoins as just a better payment rail or something more structurally important?
I think it's a modern stablecoins and blockchain in general. They're like the modern version of like what we have as a payment rails. I think we need that upgrade. Like just think about it. Like weekends, you cannot send money, right? Or at least you cannot do wire. Even if you pay with your Visa card, it doesn't get settled in next few days. It's not global. It's not cross-border by nature. We have a lot of isolated regions. So in building a global or building a payment rail that works at a scale at a global level, it's extremely hard. No one person can do that. So we're lucky that blockchain technology got adopted. And if you think about the first white paper, like the Bitcoin white paper, it's not about like Bitcoin as a digital gold. It's talking about peer-to-peer payment, decentralized peer-to-peer payment. That's the title of Bitcoin white paper. But now it happened that Bitcoin become like the digital version of gold, but the technology that it brought to the picture, which is the blockchain, is global by nature. Anywhere that you have internet, you have access to blockchain. It's free. Anyone can build on top of it. There are many different blockchains they can use. So that was a gift of Bitcoin to the world. Now that we have this global technology and that we can build on top of that, basically a rail that can solve your payment problem, that is something that it's obvious in the hindsight, but back then, 15 years ago or 16 years ago, when Bitcoin got introduced, was like really not as easy to understand or as easy to grasp. That said, there is a mismatch between what Bitcoin is and what payment needs. Bitcoin is a very, very volatile asset. Pay with Bitcoin is so 2019. No single merchant wants to accept Bitcoin anymore. They want to accept stablecoin because they don't want volatile assets. If I'm selling you a pair of shoes and the price tag is $50, I expect exactly $50, not 1 cent more or less. And Bitcoin could not fulfill that promise, even though it was global. So stablecoin is kind of bridging that gap, that it has all the benefit of the blockchain. It's global, it's fast, it's cheap, but at the same time, it's pegged to US dollars, so it doesn't have the volatility. So it has the best of both worlds, and I think that's why stablecoin is going to be very, very important, basically, like component of this new on-chain economy.
And you've spent a ton of time at the intersection of fintech and crypto. And I'm curious, when you look out at, sort of the incumbents in the payment space, in the banking space, are there certain portions of the value chain or certain elements where you think they still will win as part of like what the future of, sort of on-chain world looks like? And are there certain areas where you for sure today look at and say they're going to lose in this category? How do you look at sort of where they win and where they lose based on their embedded nature?
Oh man, you're going to make me some new enemies. So the honest answer is like a lot of these old type or incumbents or traditional players, they are experiencing their Blockbuster or IBM moment. They really need to move fast. Otherwise, they're going to lose the game. And the way I think about it is where they win is at the distribution level. They have millions of users, or if not billions of users, using those rails. Like we have hundreds of millions of users that they own, or billions of users they own, like Visa card and Mastercard. You have big banks, international banks, they have hundreds of millions of users. Or like companies like PayPal, Stripe, they have millions of merchants using them. I think that's a very hard nut to crack for a Web3 company or a technology company, because you cannot really win that overnight. The AI cannot help you. It's like a lot of relationship that you have to build, and it takes time. There's a deep moat for a lot of these companies that they can be comfortable and confident that they can keep it for a while. Where they are short or they need to innovate is how they can embrace the blockchain technology, especially if this is your money-making machine and you're generating a ton of revenue using your old rails or old technology. Bringing the entire thing on chain takes time. That's where time is against you, and it's a ticking bomb for you, because the more you wait, the more you're giving a chance to smaller companies to kind of go embrace that and build something as equivalent or even better than what you have. By that, what I mean is just think about like any payment network like Visa, Mastercard. They have mainframes, they're running and settling everything in-house across their mainframes. And blockchain is kind of makes that totally obsolete. But they have the distribution, but they don't have the best rails. Like, it requires a lot of courage to move all of that on-chain. What they're doing, Visa, Mastercard, they're trying to bring a ton of on-chain traffic to their old rails and old mainframes. They can do that for a while to buy time, but I think the boldest move here is just moving everything on-chain, get rid of your old technology and embrace blockchain. This similar thing happened in the mobile era when mobile came in. A lot of companies that they were like web native, instead of like fighting with mobile, they embraced it. They just said like, okay, we will offer the same service on web and also on mobile, right? They didn't say like mobile is a competition, I'm not going to embrace it. I think blockchain could be a friend, not a foe for a lot of these networks, but they need to have the intention to leverage that and to their benefit. I don't see a lot of that, so I think that's the place that they might lose. But the part that they win is the distribution piece.
And for folks that maybe aren't as familiar with where Mesh integrates into maybe where they would interact with the financial system and with payments, can you, Bam, just give folks a quick sense of, hey, if you're using, you're undertaking these types of activities, this is where you would see Mesh, maybe not see Mesh, but Mesh is powering things in the back end. Maybe just give folks a sense of where you all sit in the stack.
Yeah, so a lot of companies, they like a Stripe or others, like they can offer crypto payment. Like if you want to, let's say, deposit money to your Coinbase, you can easily do that. Coinbase accepts any sort of crypto, like almost all the main networks, main tokens. The problem is those products are not built with the user experience in mind, in terms of like how easy the user of a different platform can deposit money to you, or if it's a me-to-me payment, how can I move my money from my Kraken or from my Binance to Coinbase, or from my Binance to my Collison account to top up my wallet, or from my, I don't know, Coinbase to my MetaMask wallet, or if I want to pay for something and there is an option to pay with crypto, I need to transfer my assets from where I'm holding my assets or my crypto to the merchant. Most of them are built around how many tokens you can accept, how many networks you're supporting. The recipient user experience is more important than the sender's user experience, which we believe it's wrong way of thinking of that. So we want to kind of make it as secure, as simple as possible for people to move assets without even thinking what network they need to use, without even thinking about the gas fee, about the user experience across different platforms is different. Just connect your account, hit a button, and then the transfer automatically happens. I think that's kind of where Mesh shines. If everything was just Bitcoin and one chain and everyone would use that, Mesh had almost no value. But because it's a fragmented world, we have hundreds of different chains, different exchanges, different wallets, different asset type. Mesh can consolidate all of that complexity so people can move assets from point A to point B for many different use cases without even thinking of the complexities.
And, maybe starting to move into like, what does the world look like as more and more value moves on chain? Bam, what do you think becomes the gating factor for moving value on chain in larger and larger increments? Is it infrastructure? Is it amount of connectivity? Is it regulatory? Is it legislative? Like, what's your view on what gates the next $1, $2, $3, $4, $10 trillion on chain?
I think the big unlock was the Genius Act. Genius Act was all about a stablecoin. And now we have the second biggest unlock pending, which is the Clarity Act, which is a broader, basically regulatory framework for any sort of crypto assets, or digital assets, not just stablecoins. I think that's very important if we get the bipartisan support behind it. If U.S. wants to be the leading economy, they need to embrace blockchain technology. And if that passes, I would say the biggest floodgate will be open, and then a lot of these players that they were mostly risk averse, mostly banking sector, they would embrace this technology. Just think about like Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, companies that you wouldn't even imagine that they come into crypto. Now they were talking about their own stablecoin, enabling people to move all sort of assets. And if you add this to this trend plus the real world assets, like things like mortgage, real estate, equity are being tokenized, not because people want to say like, we're cool, we're using and leveraging technology. It's actually cheaper, faster, better for both customers and also these banks. The only reason they would not touch it was because crypto was unregulated. And these regulated entities, they didn't want to kind of get burned because they want to kind of be on the leading edge, but not necessarily on the bleeding edge of the things that's happening or trends that are happening. So as a result of that, this regulatory framework would enable them to embrace this because the intention is there, the incentive is there, and the last piece of puzzle is the regulatory framework, which can potentially unlock tens of trillions of dollars to come on chain. My bold prediction is crypto market cap goes from 4 trillion to 100 trillion, not because Bitcoin price is going up. That's because all these real world assets are coming on chain in the next 3 to 5 years.
So Bam, I've heard you give many a talk on agentic commerce and how AI agents will transact using stablecoins and what that potentially means for stablecoin usage and frankly for commerce more generally. Where do you think I'll call it agentic commerce gets to a certain sort of velocity and scale that becomes interesting? Is it, agent to agent transactions, microtransactions, or higher like value or higher like notional value financial decisions? How do you see sort of the agentic commerce picture taking shape?
I think it's a multifaceted or multi-surface thing. So basically, one thing that's happening is on the consumer behavior side. people tend to go to the ChatGPT, Perplexity, their Claude, they ask their questions there, and they would enable those agents to pay on their behalf. For instance, if you want to book a family trip, and you have to punch in all sort of information manually, information that your agent already has. You have to punch in your credit card manually. I think agentic commerce will shine in those areas that makes your life easier, and basically enables you to pay instantly versus just spend like a few hours to handle and manage everything and double check everything. That's one area that agentic commerce can help. I'm not sure if you've heard or have seen the news. Last year, Thanksgiving or Christmas, like one of these two, people bought like more than 80% of what they wanted to buy as a gift. They used ChatGPT to at least pick the item for them. And I think next step is like enabling your agent to transact on your behalf. I think that's a huge number. That's a big consumer behavioral change that happens in maybe every decade or every century. So we're like looking at something that is we've never seen in the last 20 years. Maybe mobile did some behavioral change 15 years ago, but since then we never had this massive change in the consumer behavior. The second piece is the agent to agent type of transaction, which is microtransaction. The reason that people are excited about agentic commerce and we're seeing different protocols is because what internet did to commerce, agentic is doing to the commerce as well. Like we got 1,000x bigger economy because of internet. We're getting another 1,000x because of agentic effect. And the reason is very simple. People tend to do 2 transactions per day in average. Agents will do hundreds, if not thousands of transactions per day. We have 5 billion people connected to internet. We will have hundreds of billions of agents connected to internet. So we will have new type of entities that transacting constantly and continuously on behalf of users. And that's where blockchain comes to the picture, because this new modern economy requires a new ledger, requires a new payment rail. And here is why. A lot of these transactions are microtransactions. Just imagine you want to pay a fraction of a cent for a service, for an API call. How can you do that using Visa, Mastercard? Or you want to wire, like especially if it's a cross-border transaction. Blockchain is a global technology that is connected to internet, that's cheap, fast, and global, can solve that problem for a lot of these agents. That's what makes stablecoins even more interesting for this new modern economy that AI and crypto are going to run the future.
Yeah, and I think on the consumer side especially, I think that what we're going through now is a bit of a bridging of a trust gap that to me has existed in a lot of transformational technologies. It reminds me quite a bit of, I had a lot of folks tell me I'm not going to ever take an Uber. It's very strange to get in a stranger's car. And when you think about that in hindsight now, it seems like a bizarre stance to take. I think similarly, some folks look at agentic commerce as it relates to the consumer and says, no one's going to trust an agent to pay or transact on their behalf. And I think that there's some element of it starts with maybe some guardrails. It starts with the first couple transactions. And I think to your point, it gets to a place where it becomes habitual and normal for sort of the broader society and for commerce for that to happen.
That's right. Yeah, I think people are trusting their agent more than their partners and spouses. So I'm sure. Yeah. So I'm sure like that is not a concern. You're already seeing that, right? So you don't even need to speculate or guess because the trend is saying otherwise.
So one thing I also wanted to ask you about is mesh really does thrive in this world of fragmentation as it relates to number of assets, the number of places in which those assets could be accepted as an example. When you look specifically at stablecoins, we've obviously seen a Cambrian explosion in just like the sheer number of stablecoins that are out there. And I think there's just been more and more announcements, frankly, of large corporations, other types of companies launching stablecoins. When you look at what the end game is for the stablecoin market, do you view it as we're going to have in the long tail or long run, hundreds, if not thousands of stablecoins, or do you think we'll see a majority of those like sort of transaction volume of assets on, let's say 10, 20 different stablecoins? How do you see that world playing out over the course of the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think there would be some consolidation, but not enough for us to have like 2, 3 stablecoins and then 2, 3 chains. Especially now, it's not about stablecoins anymore. It's about stable assets, meaning you might bring your mortgage on chain. You might bring real world assets. You might bring your licenses, your like whole house title on chain, your equities on chain, all sort of assets. I think that increases by default the number of assets or stable assets or digital assets that we will have. And as a result of that, we have different type of custodians for different type of assets, different type of chain that's built for different type of use cases and assets. And if you just multiply these numbers, it would be a very, very challenging environment for a lot of businesses to build on top. And that's kind of where Mesh comes to the picture, that abstracts all of that complexity. No matter what asset, what wallet, what chain, you can simply use Mesh to move it from point A to point B for different use cases. And I think that's my prediction, that we will see more fragmentation than consolidation.
And when you think about maybe a category of stablecoin or stable asset that doesn't either exist today or isn't well understood, when you think about that, what type of asset comes to mind that you think everybody will talk about in 10 years?
I'm not sure about 10 years, but I can tell you in 10 months, everyone is going to talk about tokenized equity. It's definitely underutilized. The same way that now that you can basically trade any time of the day, you can pay any time of the day. You should be able to trade any time of the day, whether it's weekend or any time. So the 9 to 5 type of working hours built for like 1960s doesn't really work for this modern age. Especially if you are adding like agentic commerce, you will have a lot of agentic-based kind of CFOs, that AIs that are managing your portfolio. They should be able to interact with exchanges and also with each other over weekend or any time of the day. I think tokenized equity is going to be the next big push. I already see Kraken, Coinbase, Binance, and a lot of companies, Alpaca, they're moving towards that world, and it's going to be a lot of buzz around it in the next 10 to 12 months.
And do you think there's, if you were to look at let's call it the enterprises or the institutions that are increasingly either signaling or launching digital asset initiatives, what do you think that those institutions and enterprises greatly underestimate about moving into digital assets?
I think a lot of pessimism around digital assets was related to regulatory frameworks, so that's kind of solved a lot of it. Big part of it is just my current systems kind of work. Like, why should I move it? Even though you might not see the benefits short term, but you're ignoring the fact that this is new modern technology can potentially unlock many new use cases, increases your revenue, cut a lot of your cost. But there is a lot of resistance every time. In the human history, every time that there is a change, there is a resistance in some part of the world as well. So I think it's a transition thing. So like even when people are introducing cars, people are like, I'm very happy with my horse and my carriage. Why should I upgrade to a car? But eventually they come around.
And what do you think are the core maybe elements or attributes of what folks in the crypto industry need to think about as it relates to enterprise grade? What do you think enterprise grade should mean in an ideal scenario for digital asset native companies as they think about working with more institutions and with larger swaths of capital?
The biggest part is compliance. I think the Web3 mindset is like, break as many walls as you want. There is no one watching, like just go as fast as possible. I think that has evolved in the last 15, 16 years a lot, thanks to many bear market that we had to endure. We had a lot of bad players that got filtered through the years. And I think we're living in a world that a lot of hyper compliance focused companies are coming to the picture, and they're trying to build something that is enterprise grade. The other piece is like implementing what we had in the Web2 world, like fraud, chargebacks, things in that nature, AML, KYC around Web3 world as well, kind of bridging that gap. And I believe that will help a lot to kind of have an enterprise-ready system for a lot of these use cases and institutions. It doesn't come, there is no switch that you can turn it on or off. It takes time to build that, but it's going to be a generational type of foundation that we need to bring the next billion users and also millions of institutions to come on chain.
And if BAM, we get to 100 trillion in stable assets and stable coins and so forth, what is your expectation of what deficiencies or what things will break from what has been seen as like sort of core to maybe the traditional financial system? The construct I always go to is the entire sort of digital asset ecosystem was really built to create anonymity and to make the idea of like data around a particular user and set of assets a bit more challenging to tie together. And that's really underpinned most of what I would call the data stack in traditional financial services and frankly, the Web2 internet. But from your perspective, what's going to create new challenges and maybe new opportunities once we get to 100 trillion and beyond?
I think the main challenge is fragmentation that we talked about it. I think it's the users, like when you're going to, let's say you travel, you go to Europe, you go to Nigeria, you just swipe the same US card. The merchant doesn't ask about like, okay, you have to only use Nigerian card. Your Visa card is kind of work automatically globally, right? And I think that is something that's the challenge that we need to fix and overcome. The user experience, crypto and digital assets built by crypto bros for crypto bros. We have to change the mindset. I have an example or analogy. I call it the grandma test. The crypto should be so easy to use that grandma can walk into store and tap her phone, and then be able to pay without even thinking about the gas fee and the network and things in that nature. I think simplification of this complex system is necessary to lower the barrier so anyone can use it, not just big institutions and just tech-savvy people. In terms of the advantage, I think if you added with the agentic commerce that we talked about, it's going to unlock huge amount of opportunities. Many different new, I would call it terracorn, would be born, like trillion-dollar companies can be built on top of this new wave. Of course, Mesh, we are super excited Mesh that we're kind of the forefront of that trend. And we want to kind of keep ourselves relevant and as a leading company to build and be ready for that era. But I think that is something that's going to happen whether Mesh exists or not. But Mesh is going to play an important role to solve that user experience problem that we have today.
So I've been asking a lot of the founders that we've had on the show recently, who is another founder that is either inside or outside of crypto that you deeply admire and why? So I'm curious how you'd answer that question.
In crypto and payment, I really like Patrick at Stripe, the founder of Stripe, and his brother. So they are really very, very innovative, very creative, still like at the helm and helping to build a lot of innovative stuff. And I think they're looking at blockchain as something that could potentially make Stripe $1 trillion company. Super excited to see what they're doing with Tempo and with machine-to-machine payment protocol and a lot of things that they're building around blockchain. Outside of fintech, Jensen at NVIDIA is kind of a leader I really admire.
And then what's a company that you think is massively underappreciated, either within our industry or just what you've seen as you've continued to grow Mesh and sort of the fintech ecosystem?
Other than Mesh?
Other than Mesh.
I would say the sleeping giant, from my perspective, is PayPal. And the reason is, again, back to the first part of the conversation, is the distribution that PayPal has. They have tens of millions of merchants, but more importantly, they have 450 million registered users. You cannot really build that overnight. It took them decades to be able to get there. Even a Stripe doesn't have that level of that amount of users, and also the volume that PayPal is processing is closer to 2 trillion. I think Stripe is like 1.6, 1.7. And I think that is, if you add this with agentic commerce, with a stablecoin that they have PYUSD, that makes them a sleeping giant. It really is up to them to execute. They have all the recipes and ingredients, all the ingredients to cook that recipe to become the next big thing. Again, it requires a little bit of a boldness and courage to say, like, I'm moving everything on chain. Now, there is no regulatory risk anymore. There is no backlash if you're like touching crypto. If I were PayPal or leading PayPal, I would have done this in a heartbeat. I think PayPal is definitely underappreciated.
And Ben, we've talked already about the importance of the Clarity Act getting done. I'm of the viewpoint that even if it doesn't get done, crypto and digital assets will continue to plow forward. It will just be a different opportunity set and maybe a different trajectory. How do you view a world where Clarity Act doesn't necessarily get done in at least the time frame that we're thinking about? What do you think is a result of that, both in terms of trajectory of the industry and also just generally speaking, what we'll see as maybe things that take hold faster or slower based on that?
I think it's a unique opportunity for US to keep leading the world's economy. Stablecoins and digital assets are going to stay there with or without US. So be better, like the same way that you're leveraging AI to lead the world, we have to leverage stablecoin to lead the world's economy as well. I think US is a very, very important economy, but let's not forget that it's just one country. And Clarity Act is for US, not for the world. I think crypto, as you mentioned, will continue to rise and shine. It's up on the US to decide to embrace it or fight against it. I think Clarity Act will help to bring a lot of these businesses onshore. If we don't do that, a lot of businesses are going opposite direction, offshore. So we can, as citizens, we can only hope that the US would do that. As activists, as technologists, we hope that the US would say yes, but that's all we can do and we can hope for. I know that a lot of companies like Coinbase and others, they're actively working with regulators to make it happen, and I hope they're going to be successful.
Now, I'm also curious, what is something that you believe fervently that most of your peers would disagree with? Bit of what's your contrarian take relative to maybe me and others in our industry?
I would say to date, there is a lot of resistance to accept that fragmentation is real in the world of crypto. To date, people feel like, because they have a kind of horse in the race, like every company has an L1 or a stablecoin, they feel like everything will basically gather around what they have, or like they are going to be 1 or 2 L1 that are going to, or L2s that are going to win the game or win the race. I tend to disagree with that. I think we would live in a world that we will have many different blockchains, different stable coins, different wallets, different exchanges. It tend to be just Binance and Coinbase own like 80% of the volume. Now we have local exchanges, like in Turkey we have Paribu, in India we have CoinDCX. In different part of the world, like in Brazil we have Nubank, in Europe we have Revolut. So in different part of the world, people are holding their assets in different places, in different assets, different currencies, different tokens. But that's not the most popular opinion. But like at Mesh, we believe strongly in that's our main thesis. And then the other thing that could be very interesting for your audience is, I believe that Satoshi built Bitcoin not for human, but for machines. So I think agentic commerce is going to prove that crypto's killer use case is agentic commerce. not humans paying with Bitcoin.
Okay, my second to last question, which is a little bit of an adaptation of an earlier one. What company today is like not in digital assets at all, but has the most to gain from embracing it?
So any payment company that's not in digital asset world, they can embrace it to win. Company that is not even payment company or not touching any sort of payment rails that can win. I would say could be a ledgering system, some sort of a ledgering system that you're holding assets, or they can benefit from. Like if an identity platform can basically use blockchain as a source of identity, or where you can hold your titles or collectibles and like NFTs. Those are the companies that come to my mind. But I think because the clear use case of blockchain is payment, I think Web2, non-Web3 payment companies that are not embracing as of today, they can embrace blockchain to build their next version.
So, Bam, we ask every single one of our guests to give their high stakes hot take as the last question to answer on the podcast. I know you already mentioned that you're expecting that total assets in the digital asset realm is going to get to 100 trillion. But in terms of like, what's your hot take over the next 18 to 24 months for the industry that you think people would be like, that's absolutely crazy? What would you say?
I would say 18 to 24 months, majority of the transactions happening, whether on-chain or off-chain, is done by machines and agents, not by humans.
All right. So you're sticking to agentic, and I think for good reason. So we'll park it there. Bam Azizi, CEO of MeshPay. Bam, thanks for coming on. I'm really happy we could finally do this. Look forward to having you on again.
Thank you, Alex. It was super exciting to be here, and I really appreciate the time.
That's a wrap on High Stakes, the podcast where Web3 meets the real world. For more insight into how blockchain and AI are reshaping institutions, head to validationcloud.io and follow @validationcloud across all socials. Stay tuned for more conversations from the front lines of innovation. I'm Alex Nowaka. See you next time.